My name is Walt Nygaard. I'm the co-curator, along with this gentleman, Dennis Murray, of the New Century of War exhibit. And I'd like to thank you all for coming out today. We believe that we've come up with a pretty good exhibit. And I wanted to briefly, this is going to be a brief little speaking program because we really want you to experience the artwork, to talk to the artists, to eat the food out there, and to basically have a good time. This exhibit began as an idea in the mind of our last interim director, a lady named Pat Franchino, who's sitting right there. Go like this. She had the unenviable task of being an interim director here at a time of great turmoil with the Print Center, with Combat Paper New Jersey, with the new entity that we are now, Frontline Art. And we were trying to hang in there. We were doing renovations. We were making artwork, keeping studios open. And we had the idea with the merger of the Print Center and Frontline Art. Pat had the idea of mounting a joint exhibit between the artists from the Print Center. I refer to as a civilian artist, which isn't entirely accurate, and the Combat Paper artists. And that was supposed to happen earlier in the year. But due to scheduling and other exhibits, it got bounced further and further into the year in the planning to November. And Pat said, well, okay, we got Veterans Day coming up. And to me, the year 2017 is memorable because it's the 100th anniversary of American entry into World War I. Since 2014, I was working on a series of prints commemorating artists who were killed in World War I. The war began in August 1914. Obviously, we weren't yet in it, but there's hundreds of artists who were killed in that war. And I started with the German artist Franz Marc. I did Alan Seeger, who's back there, an American artist serving with the French. And so I was already thinking about that a lot. And I mentioned it to Pat, and she said, well, let's go with that. You know, to me, 1914, or for us 1917, is when the 20th century truly began. And I don't think that we're really out of it yet. But I just want to acknowledge Pat. If it wasn't for her, this exhibit would never have gotten off the ground in the first place. So. Now, I would first like to introduce the man who's going to step in and make things go from here on out. And he is director, well, first of all, he's the co-founder of Combat Paper New Jersey. Along with Eli Wright, Dave Keefe came in here at the end of 2011 and began this small program for veterans to take our uniforms, cut them up, make them into paper, and begin making artwork. And he is instrumental for us becoming the success that we've become, that's a whole story into itself. So I want to introduce Dave Keefe.
Thank you, Walt. Appreciate that intro. Thank you, everyone, for showing up to this incredible exhibition. We're super excited about this exhibition, and this being our first exhibition as Frontline Arts. I am thrilled to be the director of Frontline Arts and to be in this position where we can reach into the community, pick out what we have, what our strengths are as artists, as printmakers, as paper makers, local artists, regional artists, and come together and strengthen what we do and connect. And that's the real mission of what Frontline Arts does. We connect. We want to make art. We want to support artists that make art, artists that say they have whatever they want to say. You come into our building and we're able to connect. And this is an incredible first show to support that mission, where we're working with artists, the veteran artist movement, the Combat Paper contingent, the Combat Paper crew, the veteran artists working with printmakers and paper makers and artists regionally around here to come together and put on a show that answers really, what is it we're facing with this never-ending war, a new century of war. I think it's a fascinating show, and I give all the congratulations to Walt Nygaard, Dennis Murray, and Pat Franchino for this idea, and putting it together and putting all of this artwork into this space. I think it's incredible that they were able to get all this artwork in here, and it looks fascinating. A year ago, I would say, somewhere around there, Pat came to me and said, this idea, we need to get the veterans, we need to get them showing in this space. We need to figure out how to get them connected to the artist. And here we are with this incredible, incredible show. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be the director of Frontline Arts and to work going forward, strengthening this community, reaching deeper into the community, and providing more comprehensive support for artists. And we're going to work very hard to do that. Myself, Amanda Gorsinger, Rachel Heberling, who's downstairs, I think, still in the studio, and the staff that supports us and around us, and our board. We're just very excited to be here and to move forward. So thank you for coming. Thank you for showing up. Enjoy this poetry reading. Enjoy this presentation, this performance, and I look forward to seeing you in the studio.
On July 28th, 1914, a pretty nondescript, unimportant archduke was assassinated that triggered an event that is so horrific, you would think that the world would never want to repeat it. But the outcome of the war to end all wars has been nothing but constant industrialized slaughter that continues either overtly or covertly all around the world. And it's distressing to know that the leaders of the world haven't learned the lessons that they should have learned back then. And it's more distressing that the leaders and the leader of our country has absolutely no desire to acknowledge that peace is better than war. I'm going to introduce 4 gifted individuals who are going to each read a poem that speaks to this topic. And the first one is my friend Ron Erickson, who's a gifted writer, who's a gifted artist. He's not a writer, but he's going to read words that speak to the tragedy of any war. Ron Erickson.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ron Erickson. Walter, thank you so much for asking me to do this. I'm going to be reading a poem by Wilfred Owen, who was a soldier and a poet. And he died at the age of 25 in his second tour at the front. And while serving with Delta Company, the 2nd Manchesters, while they were trying to cross the, what is it called, the Samrawa Canal at Ors. And the name of the poem is Dulce et Decorum Est. And that's the, I'm sorry, that's the modern Italian pronunciation. It's actually Dulce et Decorum Est. Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep, many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshot, all went lame, all blind. Drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of tired, outstripped 5-9s that dropped behind. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil sick of sin. If you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori.
Our next speaker is my friend Jan Barry, who has done 100 poetry readings. He's a gifted poet, a journalist, one of the founders of Vietnam Veterans Against the War in 1967, a member of Veterans for Peace and Combat Paper, and the primary facilitator for the Warrior Writers Project, which is sort of a writing program that's kind of a brother or sister program to Combat Paper. He wrote a piece specifically for this event. Jan Barry.
I also have to give a shout out for Walt for his artwork for a new anthology of poetry and prose that we're publishing right now. It's going to be printed next week, which commemorates the writing program that we've been doing for a number of years. And we have a book party reading coming up in Morristown at the Dodge Foundation on November 16th at 7 p.m. If you were able to join us, we'd really appreciate it. I have a poem over there. It was printed on combat paper, thinking along these same lines of making new history. When Walt asked me to write something that really encapsulates what's going on in this room, this is what I came up with. 100 years, it began with a gunshot that shattered a continent of kings' alliances, of treaties, families, ancient enmities, grudges, myths, and memories of oh so great empires, Holy Roman, Hadrian's, Pax Romana, Alexander the Great's victorious, glorious conquest from Greece to India, the Great War of 1914 bogged down in trenches, where kings' divine powers were mired in mud, and vast armies writhed in barbed wire and poison gas amid shattered cities and explosion-churned fields whose vivid crops were blood-red poppies. The cancerous carnage on the Western Front in Flanders and France, on the Italian front with Austria-Hungary, and on the Eastern Front in Russia, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and the Balkans, metastasized in the Mideast. Biblical battles that shattered empires, that begat Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, Turkey, and the resurrection of Israel. The doughboys and Marines who in 1917 marched into the monstrous morass to finish off the Boche brutes had no way of knowing their sons would be called up and be fighting in no time in World War II. And victorious as America was in 1945, great-grandsons would be stationed in Germany in tank brigades faced off against Russia and fighting endlessly in Iraq, Afghanistan, and hot spots around the world 100 years after the war to end all wars.
as I said before, since 2011, we who make combat paper have been blessed with this place. We started, Dave and Eli began, and we started showing up to cut up our uniforms, to turn them into paper, and to start making artwork, and to grow as artists. There's been a lot of conversation and talk about what we do, but one of our members, a gifted artist, an actor and writer, glass artist, all kinds of art, wrote a poem that better than anybody expresses what we do at Combat Paper. My friend, Walter Zimmerman.
Wonderful, thank you. And because I'm so vain and because I do have theater experience, I want light on my face. Thank you very much. All this history, what I'm talking about is something that really takes place now, took place just a few years ago. I was told about a group that was making paper out of their military uniforms by a friend of mine in an art group in Maplewood, New Jersey, and then she told me that they were doing that the Newark paper was doing an article and they needed people in the background. So I came out. I was really enticed mostly by the fact that I was going to be able to drive across Rattlesnake Bridge Road. This seemed like a high point in my life. So I came out, and the newspaper didn't show up, but other people did. And I sort of got hooked. I have buried much of my own past. I had forgotten, in some ways, my own military service. I served long before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was even a vague dream. So I lived a very covert life as a military person, and I continued to do that here. But the impact of being with these people has made a difference. Process for Combat Paper, July 10th, 2013. We walk into a room that was really made for other things. One or two at a time as a rule, in no particular order, in no particular pattern. Some are older, some are younger, some are women, some men, some are wounded one way, some another. We walk into a room we've been allowed to use for our own arcane purposes, our own peculiar work. And we say hello and joke, maybe have a cup of coffee as we approach, sidle up to really our apparently unproductive, obsessive, laborious task. In this room, we have some uniforms, the military kind. Some are ours, some are not. Some we salvaged from the scathing and impersonal, danger-ridden places that the puppet masters like to call the theater of war. Some were given up by next of kin. Some were picked from racks at thrift stores where, like outgrown shells of hermit crabs, these garments will wash up and pool in rows on flimsy hangers. These uniforms we now, our little group, gather round and start to snip and tear and undo. And we idly talk as the busy-handed will of this and that, a baby, a trip, a new pair of shoes, a headache, a pot of delicious beans. And without particular signal, our common history, many-faceted, spanning scores of years, touching one continent or another, begins to re-emerge. Perhaps today, snip, 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 it will be an older story brought to mind, something acted out in torrid foreign swaths of green and brown, where the enemy has robbed the orphan of the bag of crackers you just gave her, and then before you know it, she herself has vanished too. And all the while, unannounced, some chemical that's allegedly your own ally is seeping its way into your bones to work a strange, malign magic. Perhaps today, snip, snip, it will be a newer story of sitting by a mythic river and watching helpless as a clumsy, heavy cargo truck slides inexorably down the bank and flips itself, wheels in the air, over like some ungainly bug, sinking quick into the turgid water until all the young inside, all in their uniforms, are drowned. And the younger ones among us say they find in hearing tales from times before they were even born of a sense of their own history, of their identity, their heritage, their role in a still expanding tradition, while the older ones among us find a kind of awful awe in hearing from a different century the same familiar plot. And from the lives of women and men young enough to be our grandkids, young enough to have needed shielding, a protective arm, a place of warm shelter, which it was impossible for anyone to give. Slowly, steadily, these uniforms, these artifices, built as fabric lies to hide even from ourselves our inborn basic identities, these uniforms come undone, separate into drifting continental plates of poly-cotton fabric, and then break down even further into strips and into bits, and then into a watery mix, all shapeless, blurry, like half-remembered dreams. And this is the transition point, that metamorphic place where one reality ebbs away and another takes its place, where everything we mean when we say uniform, even, flat, indistinguishable one from another, interchangeable, apparently without end, disappears. And something else emerges, made up of the very same stuff, but profoundly rearranged. The ranks of warp and weft undone, the rigid pulling tension that gives the cloth its strength relieved, released. The twisted threads themselves chafed down to single fibers, adrift without rank, without differentiation. And now these liberated bits of string are brought together in a different way, the way that we, while disassembling all this cloth, have found among ourselves a life-entwining companionship. And where we began with a set of fabric disguises, now we have flat and blank, the stuff not unlike what hornets make when they build their nests, just paper, you might shrug, but waiting, as paper so patiently does, for something else, something odd, something unique, no doubt, to happen. How unspectacularly wonderful, how ordinary and miraculous all at once, that identity-suppressing clothes have become the platform and the field on which each one of us now can tell our single tale, our own version, however different, however unofficial, how oblique, how queer, of what went down out there, of what goes on in here, for and by and among us all, in a room that was really made for other things.
When I think about the whole idea behind this, of this war to end all wars, and the reality of the world that we live in, I ask myself, when you see the pictures back there of the war dead, is that worse than if you look over here and see these iconic children and the juxtaposition of our kind of clueless reality that we live in and the devastation and death that goes on every single day around us in this world that we inhabit? You know, do we live in a better world? If there's a solution to that, and if we've learned anything, I think it's going to come sort of from the ground up. And we have to learn understanding in other cultures and the fact that we're just one country in this world, and we have to learn empathy. And our next reader is unique in that category. She's a woman veteran. She served with a Army Field Hospital in Mogadishu, Somalia, before 9/11, in one of the most wild hot spots in the world. And she's came to us and began making paper. Combat paper comes in all different colors. The blue paper of Sarah Mess's operating room scrubs. And the experience of war is very different. The level of empathy that she brings to the victims of war, particularly women and children, is maybe the most important lesson that we have to hand out. My friend, Sarah Mess.
Gone. Just like that. He's gone. No tears, no goodbyes, head in hands. And it feels cold, like ice. Burning regret deep inside. Reaching back to yesterdays to trace our last goodbyes. Do you know what it's like to vaporize a 5-year-old kid at close range? On my shoulder, he sobbed. We cried. He used to tell him he was a cook in the Navy. A SEAL's life. Don't want to talk about it. Attempts to survive. And there's no taking it back. You can't undo the lie. Because there's no coming back from suicide. A.J. Krause was a Jersey City veteran, and on June 6, 2017, he died of a sailor's heart. And today was one of my proudest moments as a veteran. I marched for the first time since 2003 when the Lions Combat PTSD Unit wanted to parade us down Fifth Avenue with a PTSD banner. I marched with Veterans for Peace, Jersey City Chapter 21, and I saw banners for Gold Star mothers, and I saw banners of faces that we lost, but we don't talk about the faces that we lose long, long, long after the light of the last flare fades. And that's suicide, depleted uranium, Agent Orange, toxic, dirty, degreaser, dirty water, barium, mefloquine, anthrax, vaccinations. You can find them all on the War-Related Illness and Injury Study Center website. It took decades for the Vietnam veterans to stop being called conspiracy theorists. I too was poisoned. And I served in a war long ago, so forgotten that I forgot it myself, and I didn't submit anything here. I thought this was a World War I exhibit. I turned it off. How ironic. These are my kids. They're every veteran's kids in here. Anyone that ever came home and brought the war home with them. And I saw it is important to do artwork and to use our voices and take these blank canvases and tell the stories that haven't been told. And it's been a painful one, and I've been avoiding it. I've been avoiding the deep moral injuries, but this week I was faced with those head on. I met Kathy Eldon and Amy Eldon, Kathy Eldon's the mother of Dan Eldon, and one of the journalists that was killed on July 12th after the Mogadishu massacre in 1993, who ran to the scene to put a spotlight on what we did to them over there. And they didn't have the mercy of shrapnel or an AK-47 round or an M16 round or an RPG. They did to them what America thought they weren't capable of. They fought back for their freedom, the ultimate freedom fighters, and they National Geographic style ended their lives that day. And they made a film about it. It took 20-something years, 24 years. I was at the New York City premiere on Monday. The Journey is the Destination. It's a feature film. And I'll tell you what, I was there, and when I saw Black Hawk Down, I said, that's not how it went down, okay? I sat and I had a mirror held up to me to show me what I looked like over there. And you know what? The moral injuries run deep. And it's not every day that you see a Somali woman in a New Jersey pizzeria. She said that people often ask her if she's from the islands. Her eyes as bright as her smile, Somalia shining through her chocolate skin, hair no longer laden with the parched winds of Africa, but with the winds of a blow dryer. No textiles to robe her from her head to her feet, the Gap version of her former self. Assimilation. For becoming American, she pays through her children, their tongue, no longer her own. Iskawarin, I said. You know Somali? Confused look comes over her face. She searches for the answer in my fair skin and freckled arms as my son places a quarter in the gumball machine behind me. Mogadishu, I said. Her jaw drops as my son's gumball falls to the dirty floor. Oh no, she says. May I have another quarter? Sure. Thank you so much, I say. She slips a quarter into my son's hand, and suddenly, all the Somali children screamed in my head. Water! 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 Fuck you, America! America, fuck you! And the guilt of hellfire raining on her people rips through my being, transporting me back to convoying, full speed, heart pounding, blood racing, under the facade of a humanitarian mission. My son pops the bright green gumball into his mouth. Peace had been restored to my unknowing American boy. Dan Eldon, creativevisions.org, has funding for veterans The journey is the destination. It's a feature film that tells the truth. Thank you.
There was a poet named Ivor Gurney who was a British soldier in World War I. There were a lot of them. I wasn't really thinking about him until Sarah started to do the poem that I asked her to do. He died in 1929 in an insane asylum in England. He thought the war was still going on. This exhibit and this war opened the modern world. I guess if you go back down throughout history, there's been many modern worlds. But this is the modern world that we're living in. And so this concludes the speaking part of this exhibit. And I hope that you'll stay, look at these pictures, talk to the people who made them, talk to these wonderful friends of mine who have read and recited for you. And I thank and appreciate and respect the fact that you all came down here today to be with us. So thank you all very much.